guys, what's up? So we are finally here. Finally here to review the two swords that came in how many months ago? Yeah, blame me for being way too slow. Though I did try to be as thorough with these as possible without doing destructive tests on them. I just wanted to make sure that I was, able to give you guys as good, a description of how well they perform, how well, they handle, how they feel in the hand, how good their cutting ability is, so on and so forth. And I will admit that I did have that data for a while. It's just taken a while for me to finally compile everything and get everything going with everything else that's been going on. But we're finally here, so let's talk about them. And yes, we're reviewing two swords under this video. Let's just keep up the trend of just putting multiples in one. I mean, why stretch it out, right? So with that said, throat's feeling a little constricted. It's been kind of soreish, dryish for the past few days. So, we're reviewing, again, two beautiful blades from LK Chen Sword. They're both Dao, meaning single-edged weapons from China, and they go by the names the Heavenly Horse Hundao, I believe? Let me just make sure. Yeah, sorry. The Heavenly Horse Cavalry Hundao, and then the next one is the Mackay Double Dragons Sui Dao. Pretty sure I'm butchering the name. Sui is a Sui dynasty, but someone's going to correct me, and that's perfectly fine. So let's start with the one that represents the earliest Dao that was made, and that would be this one here, the Cavalry Hundao. Now, just I've discussed this before, but in case you are late to the party or in case you haven't heard it, this represents the earliest Dao that was made in China. I know we had recently checked out the infantry Hundao, which is a much smaller in length, much shorter in length blade, and that is an earlier model as well. But this is one that, as you can tell by the name, was meant to be used on horseback, and it definitely has the length for it. So, as you can see about the stats, let's just go over them real quick before I start talking about the sword proper. This particular sword, the sword itself, that weight is around 680 grams, or approximately 1 pound 8 ounces. For those of you who still refuse to use the metric system, give or take a few grams or a few ounces, your particular piece may vary because, again, these are handmade. Mine weighed a little bit less. It was a little closer to around 660 to 670 grams, give or take. My scale sometimes is not that perfect, but that basically is what mine achieved. Blade length is substantive. This particular one, and all of them, average around 94 centimeters. You heard that correctly. That's approximately 37 inches. This is longer than the White Arc, and it is a one-handed sword, one-handed blade, or should I say one-handed Dao, if you want to be technical or more correct. Yeah, but this was meant to be used in one hand, and I can tell you, this thing can easily be used in one hand. It doesn't feel clumsy. It doesn't feel like, a crowbar in the hand. There is some distal tapering on here, as well as some profile tapering on this weapon. So that definitely helps to be able to get the point where you want it to go. However, I do notice, probably because of the length, as well as, the blade geometry and how they've distributed the weight, that there is more of a forward presence, a bit more of a forward, feeling presence with this blade. It's a little bit more tip heavy, but it's not so tip heavy that there's a lot of stress on the wrist as you point it forwards. There is, there is a balance to this. However, you will notice that the point of balance, and I don't know how well you can see that on here, the point of balance is further down than usual on these. I would say it's almost like, wow, it's close to a foot. If we're going to be using, the Royal, we're going to be using the American system for a while. I'll have the exact specs on the screen, but Yeah, this definitely is a bit further down. So using this more like a Dien might be problematic, but because of the fact that this doesn't weigh too much, again, it's under 2 pounds, and the fact that despite the the tip heavy feeling of this, it's not so tip heavy that you still can't get the point where you want it to go, and the fact that again this blade is more or less straight, and I say more or less because there's a very slight inward curve to this. Yeah, you could still employ this with, a kind of cut and thrust style, which is what the Dien is known for. However, it is obvious from the way this feels, not to mention the way it was used historically, that this was meant more for the cut. And in particular, since this is a cavalry bow, it was meant to be used on horseback. So I'm pretty sure you guys can imagine, how it must have been used in that way. However, as you can, if you decide to like research, pictures of this weapon in the past, like, depictions of people using or wearing this weapon during that time period, you see certain, Han Dynasty swordsmen and gentlemen, standing around with the weapon or wearing the weapon like they would Dien. So I would not be surprised if this was, a personal weapon, just like the Dien was, with the same length, and was probably employed in, self-defense or duels or what have you during that time period. So one thing that struck me while handling this is the handguard. Now, let's just start with the positives. Again, you could probably tell by the slight discoloring on the cord that I've handled this quite a bit. Like I've been practicing with it, using it, wielding it, cutting with it, all that sort of stuff. So yeah, there's, a bit of, hand sweat and stuff that, got onto the material. That's what happens. But no matter how heavily I use this, the cord is tightly wrapped. It has not budged a millimeter. It's, and again, this has been typical of the swords that I've been getting from this company. When they wrap a blade, they wrap a blade. So yeah, this isn't going anywhere. It hasn't gone anywhere. However, I will say that, again, I don't think I have massive sized hands, but they are fairly large. And the handguard here is kind of small for me. So I did find at times that it was a little difficult for me to, kind of adjust my grip with certain motions. Like, I don't like using a hammer grip when I use a sword, for hopefully obvious reasons. And so when I'm adjusting, during certain cuts or thrusts or whatever, I kind of run out of handle a bit, where the ring starts to cut. Well, I shouldn't say cut, but the ring starts going into the palm, when I'm going like that. So I would advise, for people who happen to have large hands, this might be a problem for you, especially when you consider that there's no real hand guard. Again, this particular weapon was, especially if you were off your horse, was used in conjunction with a shield for protection. So they didn't really have much of a need for a hand guard. And this one, like, unlike the Dien, where they at least had some type of, hand guard to keep your hand from going onto the blade, this has nothing, which normally doesn't bother me at all. I'm used to weapons like this, but with such a small hand guard, that might be a problem for some people if they have really big hands. So again, that's something that you might want to consider. The ring on here, again, really good tough steel, just like the rest of the blade. However, I've noticed, and you probably can see the same thing there, that it turns out that that black on there isn't, because the iron was burnt or heated or anything like that. Well, obviously the blade has been heat treated, but the black on there is painted on. So in case some people might have a problem with that, yeah, I just thought that I'd point that out. It's going to flake off from use. Maybe you can repaint it, or if those of you are a little bit more adventurous, if you do want to give it that more burnt black iron thing, maybe you can heat it up or something. But I'm not too sure that's a good idea. But yeah, just thought I would bring that to your attention. The black on here is not because of the iron being heated or burnt or something like that, like you might find on certain other pieces. And in fact, one of the earliest Dao ones, you guys have seen that one before. That one has a more natural dark iron coloring on that one. Steel on here is the same type of steel that they tend to use on their other blades. It's folded pattern steel, and it's a combination of 1065 high carbon steel mixed with T8 tungsten cobalt vanadium steel, which is a type of tool steel that they use in China. Very tough, very resilient, and it can hold an edge quite well. I tested this. Again, I don't really have much materials to use, and it's not like I have a whole lot of money to keep buying, tatami mats, though I would really like to, practice on those. But I used some rather hard bottles that, with softer steels, they could probably damage the edge. This is held up on all of those, and you will see with the cutting test when I do it that I've actually gone through and hit, some harder objects and, like the caps on the bottles or the thicker plastic, and this went through them like it was nothing. So, yeah, let's go, of course, talk about the scabbard. Again, as typical as with a lot of LK Chen weapons, very simple but elegant and understated scabbard. The fittings are nice and tight. The glue that they used was pretty good on here. Same thing with, the fittings there. It's your, typical brass or bronze. I keep thinking they say bronze or is it brass? But yeah, they're, the fittings are nice and thick, especially the sword hanger there. The end caps have not come off on these, thankfully. I know about the issues that can sometimes happen, when it comes to shipping from one country to another. We had that issue with some of the swords from LK Chen before, but this, they've actually, held. Though if they do fall off, well, thankfully that you got solutions for that, but thankfully, and this was the case with this one. So, yeah. One thing I have to say, besides the fact that this handles quite well in one hand, is how it cuts. My God, can this thing cut? Many times when I was cutting through the bottles, I barely felt them, unless they were really hard, and even then, it just went right through. This has one hell of an edge. I have to say, whoever's polishing these blades over there at LK Chen Swords really does not like, if the sword is supposed to be sharp, they want to make sure it's sharp. Every last sharpened blade, like, after the first couple of blades I've gotten from them, from this point on, like, I know there were, like I said, there was like a couple of Flying Phoenixes or something where the blade was not too sharp, it was sharp enough. But ever since, like, after I went through the second batch of LK5s, these things have been, like, just unbelievable how sharp they can get. And this one's no exception. So yeah, this is not a toy. Be careful. I will say, however, that it's obvious that these are being hand polished. I have noticed a little bit of irregularity when it comes to the edge bevel, and I don't know if you can see that. It's not a perfect straight line. You will see, at least on this particular piece, there was just a little bit of unevenness here and there, but it doesn't really bother me because it's not so blatant that it has you going, who the hell did this? It just looks more of an indication that, yes, this was done by hand, which, again, some people would probably really appreciate, especially at the price point that this is going for. So at this point, I guess I should shut up and show, well, I'm probably going to talk there too, but let's go into the cutting footage so you can see just how well this thing cuts and how easily I was able to use it while, doing those. Okay, so as you can see from this cutting footage, this blade is able to slice quite well. The bottles that you happen to see me cutting through here, these juice bottles and these smaller water bottles, are actually some of the harder shell ones. The plastic here is not the soft kind. The last one is, but you'll see why. I'll put that one in a moment. I found when I was slicing through these that I was able to do so fairly effortlessly. I didn't need to put too much strength in the swing, though I kind of did there. But I noticed even, and that was a harder bottle, but once again, I sliced through, even, when I would employ this either like a heavy cutting Dao or more like a more, refined cutter like a Dian, it still was able to slice through no matter my technique. Like, there's more of a Dao swing, and yeah, right through, like it was not even there. Again, this one I believe is more of a harder bottle. Again, slice through like it's not even there. Like, this blade is really, really sharp. Granted, that was one of the softer bottles. Again, this thing is really sharp. Now, this last one here I wanted to show, it's another softer bottle again, and as you can see, it's sliced through very, very easily. But I just wanted to show you how nimble a cutter this is. Watch this cut right here. Yeah, that's a straight down cut on an empty bottle. And split right down the middle. So there you have it. This thing performs quite well. It cuts quite well. It handles quite well, and it's a really nice, if understated, weapon. So at this point, I now have to go into the whole, is it worth it or not? And that's where I find myself somewhat conflicted. On one hand, I think this is an excellent sword. It is, especially for what it is. As a reproduction of the type of weapon that, you know, comes from that particular time period, the Han Dynasty, the late Han Dynasty, it's a fantastic reproduction. And, you know, if you go to the website and look at, you know, the comparisons to the old antiques to what this is, really, it's amazing to me that they continue to churn out weaponry as close as possible to, you know, the weapons that they're basing these on. And they're made quite well. These are not flimsy. These are not done with the wrong specifications, and they're made with really good steel and, you know, crafted quite well. On the other hand, the one thing that makes me a little like about this is, one, it's a straight Dao, which normally doesn't. Okay, so it's a straight Dao. So what? There are several people out there training in more contemporary styles using Dao that are a little less curved than others. If you can modify your technique, you could feasibly use a straight Dao with a mix of Jian and Dao technique. And in fact, there are weapons in history that were made for just that. The Goose Quill Saber, for instance. But here's the thing. This one's really long. Again, this thing's got a 94 centimeter long blade, or 37 inches for those of you, you know, using the more American measuring system. That might be a lot for some people. And also when you consider the shorter handle here, that might also throw some people off. So I find myself a little, you know, conflicted when it comes to recommending this for a Chinese stylist. Like, if you're practicing Chinese martial arts and you're thinking of getting this, realize what you're getting. This is not the typical Dao that you normally train with. It doesn't exactly handle like them. It's certainly a lot longer than them. And, you know, you're going to have to accommodate for the much longer length. And keep in mind that despite its longer length, you cannot use this with two hands. So, you know, again, who would I recommend this to? Well, I definitely would recommend this to somebody who's interested in getting a more exotic looking weapon to add to their collection. Certainly. For the price and the quality, definitely good. If you're willing to modify your fighting style a little bit, or if you're somebody with some Jian training who also has some Dao training, and you want to use a weapon where you can kind of sort of utilize both techniques, well, you couldn't go wrong with this one, though again, keep in mind the much longer length of the blades. It's much longer than what we typically see in the contemporary weapons we train with. Yeah, I would recommend this for the more adventurous or the more experimental Chinese martial artist who trains with weapons, or anybody who's interested in getting a weapon that's not typical of what you tend to see in the market. Again, it's very well made. It's, you know, at a good price. The blade is sharp as hell. It's just a really good all-around cutter. Just keep in mind some of the shortcomings. Oh, and I did forget to mention that this one, at least the one that I picked up, the fitting on the scab, this one's loose. Normally they got really tight fittings. This one, unfortunately, was loose. I don't know if all of them come like that, but that's something else to keep in mind. So, but yeah, overall, I give this one a pass. It's a really good weapon. It's just, I don't think it's for everyone. So. And now, we go from a rather interesting, elegant, simple blade to a much more ornate and a much more decorated piece. This is where we now go into the Mackay Double Dragon Sui Dao. Now, this particular piece, as you can tell by the name, is based off a weapon from the Sui Dynasty, and it was a weapon that was found in the tomb of, I believe, definitely somebody of royalty. This is not the typical. This is not a weapon that a regular foot soldier or, you know, cavalry soldier would be using. This is somebody who would be wearing this would be someone of renown. And they did a remarkable job at recreating this. If you look at the actual museum piece and you look at this, it's more or less spot on. Now, I'm going to say right off the bat, before we even get into reviewing this, there are a few caveats that I have to bring up front if I'm going to be fair. One, when this weapon was sent to me, it was obvious that somewhere along the way, there was some mail carrier who didn't really give a damn about how they were taking care of the package. So unfortunately, when this got sent to me, the scabbard was badly cracked. And it was obvious from the cracking that it was not LK Chen's fault. It wasn't from bad manufacturing. The way it was cracked, it was obvious a heavy weight had fallen on this or was placed on this. There was some irresponsible package handling when this was sent over. Now, I currently have this taped, but I'm later on going to be, you know, properly gluing it and setting it to make it better. And it's a shame too, because this scabbard the scabbard's beautiful. Really good wood. I forgot. Actually, I'll put it. I think they're gonna have I'll have the stats on there if they talk about what type of wood was used. But yeah, it's just a beautiful freaking scabbard. Nice, thick fittings on here. You know, you got the sword hanger rings there that, you know, are beautifully bolted in with these pins there. They are tight. You know, nothing's falling off, nothing's loose. Same thing with the sword itself. It's just a shame that, you know, this was manhandled on its way over to me. So yeah, that has to be mentioned before I get into anything else. So yeah, I need to bring that up, but I am not going to, again, I'm not dinging LK Chen for this, because this was not their fault. They did package it as best as they could. They had a bubble wrap, they had, you know, styrofoam, they had all that good stuff. And yet someone decided, I guess, that a refrigerator should have been placed on top of this or something. I don't know what, but it was obvious a heavy object cracked this and even split it over here. That's not their fault. It's the fault of the mail carriers. I've harped enough on that. Let's talk about the blade itself. So, this one is shorter than the other one, obviously. This one does not have a 94 centimeter blade. It has a more modest blade length of, well, I say modest, but some people might still find it long. It's an 80 centimeter blade, or 31.5 inches, which, yeah, that's within range of what you tend to see for even contemporary Chen or Dao, you know, so it handles beautifully because of that length, in fact. I love how this handles. This was a sword that for a while I couldn't put down. Every time I looked at it, I had to pick it up. And as soon as I pulled it out, you know, the scabbard, I had to start using it. And it's amazing to me how, even though this weapon was made to be used on horseback, and indeed, they said that, in fact, that the guy who used this was somebody who, you know, it was based on this was actually based on a Persian sword that was used during that time period. And if you look at earlier weapons from the time period, you know, Persian weapons, you will find a similarity in the fittings. Big similarity in the fittings, particularly the handguard here, and, you know, the shape of the handle and whatnot. Despite the fact that, again, this is a cavalry weapon, the tip, this is not a tip heavy blade. Like, this one feels more Chen-like to me than the cavalry one does. You know, the other one, the Heavenly Horse one. This one just wants to be nimbly used. Like, I can easily, and because, again, the blade is not too long, this one definitely, I can see somebody who's skilled in Dao and Chen techniques being able to handle this quite well and finding ways of combining their techniques to make this work. It just handles like a dream. It really does. Again, this one has some really good distal taper as well as good profile taper, and it gives it an exquisite balance. It really does. It's very comparable to the other Chen that LK Chen Swords offers. You will feel a little bit more, it is slightly more weight forward, but not so much like the other one. It just feels like, yeah, this thing can cut, but it obviously can be used in a much more nimble way instead of just simply slicing and dicing. Those slicing and dicing can still be nimble depending on how you do it, so whatever. Anyway, I already talked about that. The weight. This one is heavier. Believe it or not, this is the first piece to actually go over 2 pounds. 2 pounds, 1.8 ounces. So about 2 pounds, 2 ounces, or 958 grams. At least that's what it says on the website. Again, your mileage may vary on what yours is like because these are handmade. Mine weighed just at around 2 pounds, slightly above. So you will feel that. But again, this is so beautifully balanced, it doesn't really feel like 2 pounds. It just feels like a nice, light, nimble weapon. And to be perfectly honest, right at 2 pounds or close to 2 pounds is still pretty light for a sword. In fact, this is about the average weight you would expect. Now we get into the handle, and this is where things get interesting. Notice the length. This is not the original length of the piece that this is based on. And in fact, you can get this with the original sized handle if you want. They sell this in both this longer handle version and the shorter one for people, I guess, with smaller hands or with people who want a more accurate representation. Me personally, I kind of like the longer length because, again, I have slightly bigger hands. I don't think I got humongous hands, but I got decent sized hands. And having this extra space here does help, at least when I'm wielding this. If it was closer to, let's say, this one over here, I don't know how long the other handle is, and I guess I should look at the stats, and I'll put them up if I can. If it's more like this, I think this would be a little bit more uncomfortable for me to use in one hand. But as it stands, I have a lot more purchase on this. I got a lot more, room for my, for adjustment in how I'm using this. And I just find overall, this extra bit over here doesn't really get in my way when I'm using this, so it doesn't bother me. Again, your mileage may vary. You might want that smaller handle. And again, they do offer it. The one other thing, though, that I should say about the handle, which I think is a bit of a detriment, are the pins. This is something that I've had a problem with certain Chinese swords for a while now. And I can't fault LK Chen for this because, again, this is based off an actual piece, and the actual piece did have these too. But, man, these things here can really cut into your hands. I guess me constantly using, either I've gotten used to it, or maybe I've helped to bend this into the handle or something. But I remember when I first held this, I was quite conscious of the fact that this was there. Like, I could feel it in my hands, I could feel it in my palms, and I could imagine if you got this in a much smaller handle, that thing's going to be digging into your hands quite a bit. At least here, there's a little bit more space so that your fingers don't necessarily have to keep touching these all the time. And especially this, if you were using a smaller handle and you got this butting up against here, that would really be uncomfortable. I was also told, by the way, that this longer handle had, I think they got the fittings reversed or something, or basically they said that this was made more for a left hand instead of in the right hand. And I guess I could see that, because if this was a smaller handle and you got this big pin right there, having it where the fingers are would be a lot more preferable than having this where the palm side is. And I can only imagine, yeah, that would not feel good at all while I'm wielding it. So again, that's another reason why I prefer the longer handle if they're keeping the pin on this side. So that's something else to consider, depending on what version you want to get. But then again, if you guys are left-handed swordsmen and you want the smaller handle, well, at least this won't get in your way too much, right? Hopefully. Theoretically. Then there's also this, and I have to admit that I kind of had to this piece used to look nice, and I kind of messed it up a little bit, but the knot work that they did on here and how it spirals was very beautifully done. And it's the first time I've actually seen this particular pattern on a sword tassel. There's a typical pattern I usually see on sword tassels, and this one was nicer than I normally see, and I really liked that. And the extra little beads in there, it's just, a little bit of a higher end sword tassel that I normally see on these, which, again, considering the type of weapon this is supposed to be and what it represents, makes sense. Not much more to talk about other than the fact that, the wood was really good. Again, the steel Same steel that we've seen before on, the other swords. It's a mix of the 1065 high carbon steel and the T8, high speed tool steel that they tend to use, the cobalt vanadium steel that they use. And this one, again, nice and resilient, really strong, nice thick spine. This thing held up, with some of the things that I did with it. So at this point, this is where you guys are going to want me to go right into the cutting footage to show how awesome this is. And this is where I have to talk about the problem I ran up to. Remember how I said the other one was sharp as all hell? Well, this one's not. That's the other thing that I have to mention about this review. I don't really have any cutting footage. Well, okay, that's not completely true. I was able to cut one thing with this. And considering how dull this is, it's a testament to this sword that I was actually able to cut through it. But I did. And it was clean. But yeah, I haven't been able to cut much else. Yeah, it's dull. Now, how this happened? I think I got someone else's sword. Yeah. When I mentioned this to LK Chen, they actually were quite surprised and a bit unnerved at the fact that I got this. At first, they thought that they made a major mistake and forgot to polish it, and then it turned out that they sent mine out at the same time that they were supposed to send another order out to someone else who wanted a practice version of this. So, yeah, there's a very good chance that I have his and he has mine, which means that he has a sharpened version. So, yeah, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to show any cutting footage of this other than that one that you just saw, but it did cut through quite nicely. I was told, well, maybe you should sharpen it. And, yeah, I do plan to, but I'm not that great a sword polisher, and I really don't want to ruin this blade. This is too nice a blade for me to mess up with my meager sharpening skills, so I would rather wait until I bump into somebody who knows what they're doing to hone the edge on this. But I will say that because of how I was able to cut through that bottle with this dull edge, I'm quite certain that when an edge does get put on this thing, it's going to cut quite well, especially with how, the mass that's behind the blade, with how thick the spine is, and, just how well balanced this thing is, especially when you're, swinging with it and thrusting with it. I'm sorry, I had forgotten to even show you just how intricate the fittings are. Again, that handguard is gorgeous. The ring over here at the pommel with the two dragons meeting at the pearl there, the flaming pearl, beautifully done, nicely recreated. This is probably the nicest piece that they make in terms of, fancy swords, because again, LK10, they're not known for making really fancy looking weapons. They go for the more simplistic and elegant ones that are typical of what was used at the time. So to have something like this from them shows that yes, they can make a fancy piece if they want to, which I think they've already demonstrated with the Magnificent Chudian and the Roaring Dragon one. But even then, the accents on the handguards and fittings there were kind of still somewhat understated. Beautiful, but a bit understated. Here, though, this is more lavish, and they pulled it off beautifully. This looks really, really nice to me. And I don't really see any blemishes or any errors or any kind of weird glitches or mess-ups whatsoever with the detailing here. It's just very nicely done. This also leads me back into the scabbard. I love, how well this fits. This is unlike the other one, this is a very nice, snug fit. And this is also the first one I've seen from LK Chen. And it's probably because, the time period, the timepiece. The scabbard does recess right into the handguard. This is where we're going to start seeing that, thing that we tend to see with some Chinese swords, later Chinese swords, like in the Ming and Qing era, where the scabbard actually recesses into the handguard a little bit. There was at least a little bit of the wood of the scabbard there, but it's now covered by the handguard and meets the metal collar right there perfectly. It's just a nice snug fit. It looks really good, and this is just an all-around beautiful freaking weapon, and it's obvious it was made back then for someone of nobility. So for us to be able to handle something like this for the price that it's at, I think it's gorgeous. It's a privilege, I think. in many ways. So this is one I definitely would recommend a little bit more than the other one, simply because of the fact that since it has a shorter blade and the way it's balanced is a little bit more, you know, it's not as forward heavy as the other one, and the blade is not nearly as long. More contemporary Chinese martial artists would have an easier time wielding it. Not to mention that it would be a beautiful piece to practice with once their skill is up so that they can use a sharpened weapon, or maybe they can get a dull version like this one. But I can imagine, like, if you really wanted to turn some heads doing forms or something, or if you happen to know a form that actually mixes some Dao and Zen techniques, and I believe that there might be one or two of them out there. This would be a nice weapon to practice with. It will be definitely show some extra flair at the tournament. They'll allow you to use it instead of the flimsy things that they're having people use. But yeah, I really like this one. I really, really like this one. And again, I'm more of a Chen guy than a Dao guy. But it's probably because of how almost Chen-like this is that's winning me over. Not to, I mean, the fact that the fittings are also really, really nice is also kind of winning me over too. Again, this is one that it was really hard for me to put down. I just kept messing with it a lot when I was first testing it out. So, and I still every now and then when I look at it, my hands start to itch. Like it just wants to reach over. And then of course the Flying Phoenix looks at me like, "Hey, hey, stop cheating!" You know, but, yeah. So yeah, overall, I could definitely recommend this one easily. And it's not knocking the Heavenly Horse. That's a great one as well. And if you are interested in getting a weapon that's more in tune with what they were using back then, yeah, great weapon. Just keep in mind what you're getting. This is as simple as it looks. Looks can be deceiving. This is a hell of a sword to handle once you get it in your hand. Once you actually pull it out, and like, whoa, wait a minute. This thing wants to kill. This thing was just made. This thing was made for one purpose only. You know, just like many other understated weapons. This one, it has more of a sense of elegance about it for obvious reasons when you consider what this piece was made for. What this one was based on. What this is a replica of. And it's a beautiful weapon. Like, I really, really like this one. So I think it's worth the price that it's going for. In my personal opinion, considering the amount of work that went into it, it's very well balanced. I'm quite certain it cuts quite well. I couldn't tell you, unfortunately, but maybe one of these days I will be able to give it a proper cutting test, and then I can really show off what it can do. But even for what I got, I was still pretty impressed. So enough of that. I think I rambled on quite a bit. I hope you guys liked the review. I hope LK Chen, I've already told them my thoughts on the weapons and told them what they could do to improve and what I liked and disliked and all that stuff. But yeah, overall, I really liked this one. There was very little for me to complain about. And even in this one, very little to complain about other than the size of the handguard, which again, this was typical of what the weapons were like back then. So I can't really fault them for that. It's just, I'm not really built for this one. But I still do like this one, however. I really do. It was a lot of fun cutting with it. So I hope you guys enjoyed the review. I will have some other stuff up soonish. And yeah, catch you guys later.